Make sure mic's on. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Wow, this microphone's working, I think. Today we're talking about AI, about artificial intelligence. This has obviously been in the news a great deal recently. It has some huge positive effects that we're seeing, but also a number of things that I think many of us are fearful about. So I'm glad we're going to spend some time today talking about AI, about artificial intelligence, thinking about it from a Christian framework. And we're joined by our resident expert today, Steve Harmon. Steve has 18 years of leadership experience in enterprise technology. He was most recently the Chief Revenue Officer at Sierra Wireless and has run teams of 250 people responsible for sales and marketing in the company. Prior to Sierra Wireless, he worked for BlackBerry, SAP, and Sybase. And throughout his career, he's helped businesses navigate through technological shifts and changes through cycles like the internet and big data and mobility and cybersecurity and AI. So Steve has a broad range of experience and has some good depth of perspective he can bring to this conversation today. He has a degree from the University of Florida, and maybe even more importantly, a degree from the Episcopal School of Jacksonville.
Thank you for inviting me here to talk about AI today. I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much.
Steve, I want to start with a simple question. So what is artificial intelligence? What is AI?
So artificial intelligence is a big term that describes computers and software applications that work together to mimic human thinking. So these are systems that can learn and make decisions and analyze a lot of data very, very quickly. I would say AI is not necessarily new. The companies have been working on this for a long, long time. It's kind of having its moment in the sun right now. It's definitely a buzzword. But if you think about your personal lives, voice assistants, things like Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, Siri, these have all been around for a long time. Amazon Alexa has been around for nearly 10 years, and this is artificial intelligence. This is voice recognition driven by AI. So although it's not new, I think that the democratization of AI is happening right now. It's becoming easier for regular people to use it in their personal lives, and businesses and enterprises are beginning to adopt it very, very quickly. And so, whatever segment you work in, AI will impact your job, your industry, and your personal lives.
So it's not a new thing, it's just something that's suddenly kind of coming to the forefront of our awareness.
Yeah, I think it's, companies would say that they've been working on it for a long time. I think it's getting to the point where it's becoming usable, right? So machine learning, deep learning, and these large language models are now to the point where it's very usable for regular people. So if you think about Google, when Google first came out, one of the unique things was an ability for you to ask Google a question in your natural language. It sort of eliminated the need to write a SQL statement or to write some computer code to get an answer to a simple question. The AI engines that are coming out now, like ChatGPT and others, are incredibly effective at understanding complex human language. You can do things that weren't possible before, like send it a sample of your writing and ask it to mimic your writing, or ask it to summarize a complicated academic paper for you. And there are multiple applications, not just in language recognition or written word recognition, but also in recognizing images. So things like facial recognition, et cetera, et cetera. So the computer science has gotten to the point where it's becoming more and more usable, and it's no longer just a science project. Companies are adopting this and integrating it into their existing systems, and it will drive efficiency throughout business processes and personal processes in your home life as well.
So as AI is becoming more and more prevalent in the world around us, I wonder how this is like or unlike previous innovations or technologies that have been developed, the internet or social media, or going all the way back to the printing press. How do you see parallels or differences between this evolution and previous evolutions?
It's a great question. So the printing press, let's talk about that for a moment. So the printing press sped the communication of information. The printing press made books more accessible to regular people. Previously, books were luxury items only owned by kings and queens. AI is, doing something similar in terms of giving everyone the power to analyze complex data that previously could not have been analyzed without supercomputers. So there's a lot of parallels there. The internet changed the way that we all communicate. It changed the way that companies and businesses and people communicate, and AI is doing that same thing. Think about smart cities with trash cans that are connected to garbage trucks to tell the garbage trucks when they're full, or smart homes, or smart industries and factories that have connected devices that are talking to each other and using artificial intelligence to make decisions around predictive maintenance and things like that. So a lot of connections through AI that mirror the connections that the internet brought about. And social media changed the way that we communicate and interact as human beings with each other socially. The parallels there to artificial intelligence, again, not new, has been around for a long time. Think about your experiences with online e-commerce. Every time a product is suggested to you, every time your behavior is analyzed, every time a particular article shows up in your news feed, every time Amazon is suggesting to you, you purchase this product, other people who've purchased this same product have also purchased this product, and this product. Those are all examples of artificial intelligence being used in behavioral analytics, similarly to how our behavior has changed with the rise of social media.
I think one of the interesting questions about social media is when social media began, we didn't fully understand the ramifications of it. Neither the positive, how many of us spend so much of our time online today, but also we didn't understand the negative ramifications that are now being revealed about especially teenage self-confidence and issues around this. And I think that that's one of the concerns about AI. We're moving it into a whole new world, and we may not fully understand it, which is part of the reason we're having this conversation today. So can you unpack some of the negative impacts of artificial intelligence that we are seeing or that we could be seeing, and how that could play out?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, right now we're in a little bit of an arms race. It's a little bit of the gold rush, right? So you've got multiple AI labs and multiple AI companies that are racing as fast as possible to deliver commercial products to market. With that speed comes risk, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I think that one of the largest negatives is also one of the largest positives, job displacement. So certainly jobs will be displaced through artificial intelligence, especially jobs that are less complex. But artificial intelligence will also create new jobs, just like each of these other technology paradigm shifts, mobility, cybersecurity, the internet, social media have both done the same thing, created and also eliminated jobs. I think there's also a risk around concentration of power, right? If the artificial intelligence engines are developed by 3 companies, and those are the only 3 companies that control the science and the math behind these algorithms, we're concentrating that power in those 3 companies, which is a little bit scary. There's also a question around exacerbation of the digital divide or the wealth gap. If artificial intelligence is a tool that only the wealthy can use, then we're exacerbating that wealth gap. If artificial intelligence is difficult to use, still in this country today, the United States federal government is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to close the digital divide. We have rural communities, school children, Indian reservations that still to this day do not have high-speed internet. The advent and the adoption of AI could further exacerbate that. So those are a couple of risks. I would also talk about privacy and security as more and more of your personal interactions and your business interactions are completed online and handled through artificial intelligence engines. The same concerns that you should have around personal information, will exist and become will still be important in an AI-dominated environment. And then I think it's also important to talk about bias. So these are computer systems that are designed to look for patterns in data. But they're only as good as the computer algorithm. They're only as good as the data they have. So if there's bias in the data, then that bias will be reflected in the results of the AI query. Think about this in terms of hiring. Discrimination bias, discrimination in lending. These are all areas where this is a risk that needs to be considered by industry so that we're building these tools with an ethical framework and doing everything we can to eliminate the bias in the machine. And some of that bias is unconscious bias, which is very difficult to identify and to manage, but I think one of the first steps is educating, and it's part of the reason why we're conducting this today. As more people become educated about it and the possibility for bias, you begin to learn to look for it.
Well, and just to clarify, the reason that there can be bias in artificial intelligence, for example, with hiring, is if current hiring managers are biased in the employees they're hiring, and the artificial intelligence is learning to mimic them, it's mimicking the bias.
It's mimicking the bias, or the data set that it's looking at is a data set that comes from a particular community or a particular demographic, or excludes a community or excludes a demographic. And so as this AI engine is trying to answer a question or select the most appropriate candidate, maybe the candidate pool is not complete. It's a population. It's a subset of a population. I would also say, as you think about these systems, again, what are they doing? They're looking for patterns. They're looking for repetition in data. They're looking to learn and to make decisions based on data. They do not have a moral compass. AI does not know right from wrong, which introduces a number of very interesting discussion points. So think about autonomous driving. Some vehicles are getting very close to fully autonomous driving. I rented and drove a Tesla for the first time this year, and it was a little bit scary how much driving this vehicle could do. But think about the prioritization of life in an accident. That vehicle is making the decision to swerve into an oncoming traffic or to swerve and hit a pedestrian. Whose life is it prioritizing, and why? And who's made that decision? And who's written that program? And so those are the, as AI is implemented more in industrial machinery, missiles and defense equipment, weapons, vehicles, these types of moral compass, right and wrong questions will have to be dealt with.
And they have to be dealt with by those who are creating the AI, because the AI can't do it itself.
Certainly.
I think one of the other concerns about AI is the question, what is truth? I think there is an ability for what's actually happened to become less clear. There was someone who was testifying before a state Senate committee recently, and she talked about how she got a call, this woman got a call on her phone, and it was someone who said they'd kidnapped her daughter, and they had her daughter's voice on the phone there, and they asked for $1 million. It wasn't the daughter, it was a voice simulation. But to the mother, this sounded exactly like her daughter's voice. I recently asked ChatGPT to write a little bio on me, and it was fascinating because part of it was right, and part of it was so far wrong. So this intermixing of truth and fiction in a way that's hard to take apart. I think that's one of the concerns that many people have. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, the risk of making fake news look more real becomes realer with AI. It becomes harder to determine what is real and what's not. A couple other examples. I read an article and saw some pictures about a made-up event. It was a made-up event to explain the risk of fake news. The event was a factory in Vancouver that exploded, and a bunch of people were killed, and there was a manufactured photograph of the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada standing in front of this burning pile of rubble, but that's an event that never happened. And so I am fearful about, every new paradigm shift in technology, there are opportunities for scammers to exploit that. And so I would just caution everyone to, as you're consuming information, reading news online, consider the sources. Get back to the basics. Where is this information coming from? Is it a reputable source in your opinion? Have you read the entire article to understand the full point of view? Are you seeing the same information only from one point of view, or is this same information being reported from multiple reputable news sources? These are all things that we can use to sort of mentally check and balance, is this real, is this fake? But the image creation capability of some of these AI engines is really, really strong, and it's very difficult to tell truth from fiction. And I think eventually we'll get to the point where AI is actually used to determine, is this an actual image or is this a manufactured image? I think we'll actually begin to use it against itself to separate fact from fiction.
It's interesting for me to think about I guess, where we get good knowledge from. For so long we had good encyclopedias, and in the past decade or two, with the advent and then the proliferation of Wikipedia and other kind of democratic sources of information, we've had some really good things developed. Wikipedia today is highly, highly accurate through a broad base of knowledge. And I wonder what AI will do with that, if it's going to be something where we're going to have to swing a little bit back the other way and focus more on reputable sources, at least for some period of time in this advent of AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think the positives far outweigh the negatives, right?
So can you shift to that for a second then, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think the impact you're going to see in AI across multiple segments and industries it's already happening. It's incredibly impactful, right? The efficiencies that can be gained from analyzing vast amounts of information very quickly are unparalleled to what we've been able to do before. So, in medicine, we'll be able to have faster, more accurate patient diagnoses that result in better patient outcomes, faster identification and development of new drugs, solving complicated genetic problems by sequencing the human genome. These were supercomputer problems that took computers the size of this room to solve 15 years ago that are now, we're now getting results returned almost in real time, right? And so the impact of better decision making, of a better user experience, of more efficient working, I think there's a lot of positives that outweigh the negatives at this point. But I think we should tread carefully as a society with industry leaders, policymakers, and society to put the right ethical framework and legal framework in place so that we can educate and be informed and be responsible about the use of AI.
It's interesting to think about how, from an individual perspective, AI could have positive benefits for us. A little confession here. For fun, about 6 weeks ago, I sat down on a Saturday night. I wasn't preaching the next day, but I went into one of these chat engines, ChatGPT, and I wrote, based on tomorrow's lectionary, write me a sermon I could preach in an Episcopal church. And it came back with a sermon. I didn't preach it. It wasn't good, but it wasn't the worst sermon I've ever heard. It was bizarre to see this there produced by a computer, as that wasn't helpful in any real way. But how in your life are you finding any of AI helpful in a real way?
I'll tell you a real-world example 2 weeks ago. So I'm considering taking a position working with a new company. This company is publicly traded, and they're not in the best financial situation. They have a lot of debt. They need more revenue. They have high operational expense, low gross margin. But when you begin to analyze the financial data for a publicly traded company, it can get very complex very quickly. So I took information from the annual reports, from the quarterly reports, from the income statement, from the balance sheet, and I fed all of this into ChatGPT and asked it for its recommendations on recapitalizing the company. Like, what are the top 5 things that I should do if I was leading this company to try and bring it back to financial health? And to your point, I don't think it was perfect, but this particular engine, ChatGPT, basically has access to like everything that's been written on the internet prior to 2021. And so, to look at other examples of complex financial analysis, learn from that, and then take what it's learned and apply that to the information that I've given it, and to return that result set in seconds, this would have been a project that I would have sat with a CFO and spent a week working on to come up with the same type of framework that it delivered in seconds.
So what for an average person are some ways, for those of us who aren't dealing with huge numbers and things like that, what are some ways we can test the waters with some of this AI?
Yeah, so the one that we've talked about a little bit here today is called ChatGPT. Anybody can go to ChatGPT. It's run by the OpenAI consortium. It's free. It's available to use. You can create an account, and or you can use your existing Google account. And then you can just start interacting with it, asking it questions. I think one of the ways that's most interesting to me is that you can provide this engine, and it's persistent. It remembers everything you've asked it, because you're logged in under your account. You can provide it examples of your writing. You could upload your entire, all the books you've written, and then ask it questions and ask it to respond to you in your style of writing, which is awesome. It can give you complicated answers to complicated questions, and then you can go back to it and say, I need a more simplified answer. I need you to explain this to me like I'm a kindergartner. So there's a number of applications that I've seen. Travel planning. Plan an itinerary for me of fun things to do with a family of 4 in Maine this summer.
Is that a made-up example?
It was a made-up example, but I am going to Maine this summer with a family of 4, so I may ask for some help on that travel planning. I was reading an article this morning about a family who was trying to meal plan for the week, and they had some specific dietary restrictions, and they asked it to provide a weekly meal plan for someone who is vegan and has an egg allergy or a nut allergy, and it returned a draft meal plan. So I think I'm certainly not the expert in all of this, but I and my family, we're just sort of scratching the surface and learning how we can use it. Almost like the first interactions that you had with your personal assistant, Siri or Alexa or Amazon. We're sort of interacting with it and learning what it can do. I think in the business realm, taking that interaction and applying it to complicated business problems and integrating it with existing business systems, that's where the difference is going to be made, and that's where the winners and losers will be made in the companies that are really trying to develop enterprise class solutions.
So you overall, it sounds like, think the benefits of AI in the long term outweigh the challenges or the problems it presents.
I mean, this is as big of a paradigm shift as the internet or mobility. Moving from the digitization of books and paper material. Moving everything from a computer that was based on your desktop to a computer that's in your telephone. It's not going away. I don't think you should be afraid of it. I think you should embrace it, understand it. Certainly we need to be responsible about it, but it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. There's no avoiding it. The impact it will have in driving efficiency and productivity across every segment, across every industry, whatever your job function is, you will be impacted. You will feel the benefit of AI or the impact of AI.
And from a Christian ethical framework, we could say that the dangers are a loss of certainty of some knowledge, some truth. On the positive side, there's potential to promote human health, to be more efficient in caring for others. So there are these, I guess, positive and negative frameworks. How within that do we mitigate the risks while leaning towards kind of the positive benefits over the next years?
I mean, complicated problems. How do we solve climate change? How do we move to less fossil fuels? These are all the things that people are working on with this type of compute power right now. How do we mitigate it? This is a huge question for society to be able to balance this correctly. I think it's going to be a multidisciplinary approach. You're going to need leaders from industry who are developing these engines and have financial motivation to win in this gold rush, because that's what it is right now. You're going to need policymakers, security experts and researchers, and society as a whole, I think, will in elections and in upcoming, discussions, we'll have an opportunity to, vote people into power that, want to put more controls or write better laws around artificial intelligence and its use. But all of these different parties are going to have to come together to create a legal framework, a governance framework, and an education framework. And I think that, the education part is very new, but I think that will continue. My kids are learning about AI in school. They will study it at university, much more than, this was not something that you or I learned at university, right? But now there will be entire programs and PhD programs and experts that come out in AI that help to continue to, craft the future trajectory of where this technology is going to go. So I think it's all around, responsible use of the technology with an acknowledgement that certainly there is risk and certainly there are bad actors out there that will try and exploit it.
Do you have any final thoughts before we open this up to a conversation?
I do have a final thought. I'd like to try and run a little bit of a demo here. And, I really have no idea how this is going to turn out. So that's why it's a live demonstration. So I've got ChatGPT open right now, and I'm going to give it a prompt. And I'll read you the results of this prompt, just to give you an idea of, its capability. Mark is a friend of mine and a priest at my church, period. Mark invited me to give a discussion in the church around artificial intelligence, period. I need to write Mark a thank you note, period. I would like your help to write this thank you note, but I would like for you to write it in the style of Dr. Seuss. That's the prompt. We'll see what happens.
So you just dictated that.
I just dictated that. And now I will ask it to return a result. It's writing. I should have told it to use simple language and keep it less than 100 words. Here's what it came back with in real time. Dear Reverend Mark, with a heart so kind, I write this note with joy in mind. Your invitation to speak on AI filled my heart with glee up to the sky. In our cherished church, warm and bright, you welcome thoughts with pure delight. Together we shared knowledge and more, unlocking minds, exploring galore. Oh, thank you, dear Mark, for this chance to speak on AI's wondrous dance. Your support and kindness, a guiding light, made our discussion shine ever so bright. In rhymes and words, we came together, spreading wisdom like birds of a feather. With gratitude, I extend this note for your friendship, Reverend Mark I dote. Yours sincerely.
That is so kind of you.
You're very welcome. Any questions?
Kate will bring the microphone to you. We want to make sure everyone has the microphone when you're asking questions. It's not only for people in this room, but people online can't hear you if you project without the microphone. So hold the microphone close to you as you ask your question.
Does AI really need to be controlled, going back to the risk of having too much control, government regulations and the like? And I refer to the internet, which is pretty wide open and with certainly controls if you're defaming somebody. That's basically my question. And you can see my biases towards not having a lot of government interference.
Yeah, I think your question is, does it need to be controlled, or is it better just to let it be organic and grow into whatever it's going to become? It's probably a little bit of both. Even though the internet is, we'll say, uncontrolled, you can still break laws on the internet. You can still conduct hate speech on the internet. You can still conduct fraud on the internet. You can still, conduct crime on the internet. So I think it's going to grow organically because you have a bunch of scientific engineers and companies that are motivated, that are putting huge teams of incredibly brilliant computer scientists behind writing these algorithms and advancing this as quickly as possible. And frankly, government's too slow to get in the way to that progress. But I do think we're going to come to a point, like we have with every other technological paradigm shift, where we begin to have to regulate it, right? You have to put rules in place around the use of mobility, around things like cybersecurity, around things like cybercrime. So I think it's inevitable that we're going to have some guidelines. I'm not going to, maybe not necessarily laws, but some sort of ethical framework, some guidelines, and that may be self-regulating to a certain extent. You know, companies that are using artificial intelligence and integrating that into missile defense systems or weapon systems, I think will take steps to mitigate that use and do that safely. But I think it's going to be a combination over time of self-regulation, society regulation, and laws that are passed.
You said earlier that there are only 3 companies that are working on this. Could you tell us what they are, who
Well,
they
there's
are?
many companies working on this. My point earlier was that if you have 3 winners, or maybe there's one company, there's a concentration of power risk, right? If it was Google or Amazon or Microsoft, all of which are very advanced in AI engines, but there are many other companies that are working on it, or working on AI to solve a specific problem in a specific industry. But I think that, like any technology, we kind of want this to be available for all of society, for all of the world. If you just had one company controlling all of it, there's a ton of concentration risk. They get to write the rules at that point, and I don't think that's the way that we want this to be deployed. You wouldn't, you know, we have many mobile phone manufacturers. You can choose what mobile phone, you know, they're in having choice and having a free market economy, you know, there's less risk of concentration of power.
Yes, and I'm a retired physician, and there's an Office of National Coordination in DC that is responsible for making all of the computerized medical records talk to each other and be effective at storing the proper information. It's abysmal. It was designed by the people who actually were doing the computers, the manufacturers, and they told Washington what to put in the programs. They produced those programs, and then we were required to buy them because they were approved by the ONC. So to the points that are being made here, it's critical that an appropriate team, probably international, get together, because we're not the only country that is putting together these sophisticated programs, and we need to have them set up properly from the very beginning with the proper protections from the very beginning, not to stifle, you know, and not to have a loss of creativity, but in order to make sure that we're all protected and that the right things go in from the beginning. So that's,
I agree.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's hard to disagree with your dad, though.
I know.
Steve's dad, for everyone's awareness.
Thank you, Steve. The question I have is regarding the wealth divide that you mentioned could be exacerbated by this technology. How do you see that playing out? And if you were king, what would you do to prevent the wealth divide from getting worse due to the advancement of this technology?
The first thing I would do would be continue to invest in technology access for all Americans. You know, high-speed internet access is table stakes to be able to use tools like AI. And we still have people in this country and students in this country, you know, there's a lot of investment that goes into making sure that students, especially during the pandemic, this was a huge issue during the pandemic, for students to have access to reliable Wi-Fi to do their homework. So I would continue to invest in that, and if I was a lawmaker in Washington, D.C., that would be a top priority. I think also education is going to be key, right? If it's only we need to educate on the use of AI and on the use of technology starting in elementary school, and it should be ubiquitous throughout the country, right? It should not be something that is only taught at Ivy League schools or only taught at institutions of higher learning. Everyone should have an opportunity to understand what these technologies are, to have a chance to interact with them, and that's kind of one of the cool things about this. The barrier to entry is so low, right? You can literally go to ChatGPT, create a username and an account, and start playing with it this afternoon. So it is a low barrier to entry, but that's kind of what we thought about high-speed internet as well, and still we have millions of people in the country that struggle to have reliable internet access. So I think putting government policies in place and government funding behind providing more uniform access to this technology is what's going to help prevent that wealth gap from getting wider.
Can I ask a question of the room? You're talking about the accessibility of this. Can I ask that if you're comfortable, anyone who's used ChatGPT or Google Bard, can you raise your hand? I'm curious what percentage of us that is. A relatively small percentage.
Both my kids have their hand raised. Let the record show.
Do we have any other questions?
I was wondering, we all know the problem with fake news. So how does this system discriminate between, it gets a question, looks for the information. How does it discriminate between fake news and factual to make a pronouncement or write up something?
I mean, the operator behind this engine can tell it what it wants to generate. I'll give you an example. I was recently on vacation with my kids, and we started using one of the major image AI engines is called diffused resolution. Diffused resolution, I think it is. It's the name of the company is diffused resolution, and you can describe to it the image you want to see. And so we were playing with it. I said, I want to see a picture of Tom Hanks horseback on a beach, and it searched its entire population of images in its database, found images of Tom Hanks, found images of horses, found images of a beach, and provided 4 options to me of Tom Hanks sitting on a horse on a beach. And so you can take that one step further, back to the example I gave of the fake natural disaster or the fake political event. And so my concern would be that someone could ask an AI engine to generate an image that's not real to spur a political controversy, to start a war, to cause confusion during an election. And this is concerning. And so that's why before we get sophisticated enough, and I think eventually we will get to the point where when information comes into your world, you're able to turn that around and ask AI, is this real or fake? I don't think we're there yet. So until we get there, I think it's kind of like blocking and tackling common sense. Is this information from someone you know? Is this information from a reputable news source? Is this information that's being repeated across multiple reputable news sources? And sort of use those heuristics to determine, is it real or is it fake?
Ben, my name is Ben.
Hi, Ben.
Hey, a couple of things. I did a little research on AI when we started talking about it recently. Before then, I was just living AI. But what I discovered in some of the articles that I read was that AI goes back to 380 BC, when mathematicians, scientists, theologians were thinking that in the future we'll have machines to do the kind of thinking and reasoning that we do. And then it goes on up to the first robot and so forth, But Henry Kissinger, a former Secretary of State, wrote a book about, it's a 2017 copyright, about AI and how it's going to affect our future. And in the book, he and a couple other guys, they talk about how it should be regulated with the government and also coordinated with other countries, because other countries are also involved in AI. And then there's this concept of AGI, artificial general intelligence. They say we haven't begun to really talk about and deal with yet. So have you heard anything about that?
I haven't heard of AGI, no. But I'll keep a lookout for that book. Yeah.
I think we may have time for one or two more questions. After this, however, we'll have an opportunity for anyone who's here in person to come forward and ask Steve questions in person, but I think we have maybe two or three more questions.
Hi, I'm Mitzi. Just in my feed recently, and I've been on this ChatGPT engagement for a little bit now, comes News GPT. Have you heard of this, Steve?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so it's the first unbiased, it's called Unhuman Truth by AI. It says, don't trust the news, neither do we. So we've pioneered the world's first AI-generated news platform. No people.
What's it called again?
News GPT.
News GPT. I'll check it out.
Right. Welcome to News GPT, where there are no reporters, no bias, and no hidden agenda. So basically, they're culling through all the facts, sources of information through the internet worldwide and reporting the news to you without bias.
That's great.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's fascinating. And for every article, they said, do you think it needs to be relearned, or what do you think?
And there's new tools coming out like that all the time. So I think, tools like that will help you more confidently use AI and feel confident in the results.
Well, this is a question that may be more negative, but bullying in social media has been increased, 100-fold, which is I think the Surgeon General has come out saying that that is a risk to the mental health of our children. And with AI, the risk is that it's going to just amplify and, as you say, exacerbate that situation to the point of more detriment to our kids. So is there anything that they're doing or putting in place to control that social media aspect of AI?
It's a great question, and I don't know if any programmatic solution is as effective as a parent who knows what their kids are doing online. I've got 2 kids that are online all the time. We've got multiple devices that are connected, and we're constantly concerned about what they're doing and looking over their shoulder, and we're active in their digital lives, and we're following them to make sure that they don't step into any of the dark areas of the World Wide Web. But it's a great question. Correct. I mean, there are a couple services out there for, reputation defense, but if you will have to employ one of these services. If someone wants to tarnish your reputation or write something bad about you online, they can do that, and then they can probably weaponize that with more scale and more speed using AI. If someone wants to write a letter to the editor of the newspaper and say something bad about you in the newspaper, they can do that as well. It's more, it's a lot faster, a little bit more scary, I think, with the ability to go viral very quickly in an online environment. Yeah.
Yes, a lot of jobs that have resisted technology involve making judgments. A loan officer decides who's going to get the loan. A college admission officer of who's going to be admitted, who meets our criteria best. So the question that I have is, as AI creates this ability to analyze huge amounts of data, what is the value of human judgment in making decisions?
That's a great question. I don't know that I can answer that fully, aside from the human values, the scores that you apply to each of those candidates, or to that candidate for the loan or the candidate for the job. It's the information, the output is only as good as the information that goes in. And there's 2 inputs coming in. There's the algorithm written by a company or a person. That's the computer program that says, go look at this data and help me make a decision based on the data. And then there's the data itself. So if either of those, the data source has bias in it, or the program is written by someone with bias, you're going to end up with results that are unfair. And so having a system of checks and balances in a company or in a society or in a government or in an industry to make sure that that doesn't happen, I think comes back to this international, multidisciplinary approach to try and make sure that we're doing this ethically. But lending, hiring, think of criminal justice. These are all areas where leaders in AI see the potential for exploitation and risk.
Thank you all for your questions, and thank you so much, Steve, for joining us today. Can we give Steve a round of applause?
Thank you.
I'm going to close this in a prayer. I won't ask ChatGPT to write the prayer for me. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Dear God, we thank you for this day and this conversation. We thank you for giving us minds to think and wrestle with the challenging questions we face in our society today. We pray that as artificial intelligence continues to evolve and play an increasing role in our lives, that it may not increase disparity, that it may not cause a proliferation of untruths, but instead that it may create justice, that it may help us treat disease, that we may use it to care for those who are in need. God, help us to use AI as a tool to build up your kingdom in the city and the places where we live. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. Thank you again.